Well, I'm not an operations person. I only focus on one thing, driving leads and traffic to our own website, which feeds the business, and then help with strategy for our customers because I enjoy it. I never was planning on running the business. Even from day one, I was never the CEO. But I've done enough businesses in the past where I know where I was weak. I try not to be in roles that require operations or management. I'm a really amazing individual contributor. I'm a great contributor with a small team as well. I do really well with 4 or 5 people underneath me, and that's it. I always view success as being satisfied in life, being content. I'm not filthy rich. I'm no Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, and there's other entrepreneurs that are way more richer than me. I'm satisfied with life. I enjoy hanging out with my kids, right? I'm okay being a father. I'm okay not going into office. I'm okay not being as successful because I get to see my kids grow up.
All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Jake Dunlap Show. We are very excited that you joined us. If you haven't tuned in, this is the show where we talk to celebrities, thought, and industry leaders to really discover their journey to success. I am super excited that you're joining us. This show is like no other. I can promise you that. You might laugh, you might cry, but you will definitely leave inspired and gain a whole new level of insight into those people that you follow, love, and admire. All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Jake Dunlap Show. I am very excited today. Our guest today is a man of many stellar distinction. He's a New York Times, recognizes him as a best-selling author, obviously. Wall Street Journal calls him a top influencer on the web. Forbes says he's one of the top 10 marketers. An Entrepreneur says he created one of the 100 most brilliant companies. No less than President Obama himself recognized him as a top 100 entrepreneur. He has helped Amazon, Microsoft, Airbnb, Google, Thomson Reuters, and literally I could just keep going, help to grow to where they are now. His blog generates over 4 million visitors per month. His podcast generates over 1 million listens per month. We'll get the Jake Dunlap Show there. YouTube channel has 31 million views. We are talking today to none other than Mr. Neil Patel. Neil, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So we talked about this a little bit before. So, on the show, we're really focused on telling the story of successful entrepreneurs, CEOs, celebrities on the journeys that made them who they are. So as I mentioned before, we're going to go back in time and go back to the early days and really kind of dive into, your experience growing up and really what's helped to shape you now today as an entrepreneur. So we're going to start off born in London, right? But then very quickly, from what I understand, moved to Orange County, to Palma.
Yeah, that's right. Small city in Orange County.
So what was life for you? Again, you probably don't remember much of London, but what was life like for you then growing up in La Palma?
Yeah, life, was good. It was just a normal middle-class lifestyle. My parents struggled in the early days. Eventually, they figured out how to do okay. We were never rich, never dirt poor or anything like that. But my parents figured it out. They worked hard and they provided enough for my sister and I to go to school and even helped us with our bills and even provided cars and stuff like that.
All right. Well, that's solid. But you also had some family, right? Some influences that were, entrepreneurs or, people around you that were starting your own businesses. So are there any, think of like your early childhood, kind of pre-high school, like what are some of the big memories that you have around, your parents, your uncles and other individuals? Do you remember them, that entrepreneurship vibe or, were you just playing with your sister? What were some of the big memories you have from that stage?
Yeah. More so around me, my uncles were doing business and making good money and my parents weren't. So then when I was younger, you see them, families meeting up, playing with their kids, etc., or cousins technically. You're just like, they do better than us. What's the difference? They do business, we don't. And I realized that if you create your own business, you can actually do much, much better. There's also some failures and licks that you may have to take because not all my uncle's deals were successful. But nonetheless, I saw that doing business didn't hurt.
Yeah. Do you remember, I don't know if it's maybe a get together, or do you remember like a few moments of when that like really stood out to you? Were
No,
there any kind of,
it wasn't
yeah.
any few moments. It's just as I was growing up, like you notice the difference. Your parents drive a Toyota Camry, they drive a Mercedes. You have a small house with no air conditioning. They have a bigger house with air conditioning, right? Like you start noticing a lot of those little things, and it's just like it really does over time. It really did make me want a better life.
Yeah. So you basically saw that life and thought, okay, well, maybe this is something. And then obviously, as you get into high school, John F. Kennedy High School, if I'm correct,
Yeah,
in La Palma, and your freshman year, you and your older cousins start your. I don't know if this is like you technically consider this your first entrepreneurial endeavor around burn CDs. But what was it for you again as you started to get into high school? And we'll go. I mean, you did a lot of different kind of. Things to make money. Let's put it that way. So what was it that made you want to kind of start that part of the journey? What was it that for you, you're like, all right, well, I want to start to make some money now.
I wanted money. So I had a car. My parents gave me my sister's car. I believe it was a 98 Honda Civic. And I was driving it. And I was one of those Asian kids that wanted to soup up my car and make it super fast and furious. And you watch those movies, you're like, this would be so cool. And, had everything from a job at a theme park, which didn't pay much. And I was like, man, I just want to make more. So figured out how to create that side hustle, or more so main hustle other than school from, getting, I think it was called seller's permit from the State Board of Equalization in Santa Ana, and being able to go to the same car shops that other kids would buy parts from, get a discount, sell it to them for more money, and doing a lot of little things like that really added up and just helped me generate more income, right? So did CDs, help people with their television sets, literally was open to anything as long as it, in essence, paid the bills.
And and then I know that you were doing a lot of these, again, like other endeavors. So again, I mean, that's pretty, and what age, were you like 16 when you go to the State Board of Equalization, 16 or so?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's like a very entrepreneurial mindset. Cause before that, like you said, I think you were at Knott's Berry Farms and some other areas. And then where's quality systems? Where does that come in? Which I know is another, kind of endeavor around that time.
Yeah, it was a vacuum company. I was selling vacuums door to door. And they had this program during a summer. I saw it in the Penny Saver. I don't even know if Penny Saver still exists.
I don't know, man. Yeah.
And what I was doing is I was like, they had this ad. You could make, 6 figures a year. I was like, wow, 6 figures a year. And then when I went to the interview, they gave a demo on how you had to sell vacuums and you get paid a commission every time you sell one. And I was like, all right, let's do this, and I would knock door to door and try to make money however I could. Sometimes I would just get paid cleaning people's carpet. I didn't care. Sometimes, I would push hard for a sale. People are like, look, it's great. Can't afford it. I'm like, what are you talking about? You pay more for your cable TV every single month than this. What's more important, your TV or the health of your children? Like I would push it on. And I remember one time classic. I sold it to an Indian lady, and that was my first sale. And within a week or so, she refunded it or returned it and wanted her money back. So that sucked, but it is what it is.
And you remembered that still, though. You remember like that. I have some moments like that in my sales career too, where a similar situation happens, but that doesn't obviously stop you, right? You're still kind of in high school trying to find it. And what time, I mean, again, like you'd built up some savings at this point, and then you started Advice Monkey. How old were you when you started Advice Monkey?
15 and a half. So I was doing some of these things at the same time, because when I first started my job hunt, I couldn't find a high paying job like that Microsoft or Oracle or any of those guys would give. But when I was searching the web on a site called Monster.com, saw they were making millions. I'm like, if I just make 1% of what they make, which would be over $1 million at the time, I'd be like, I would be rich. So I'm just going to copy them. And I didn't do well copying them.
But you tried, right? Like, what was it? Again, I guess as you saw them as like the leader. I remember that I actually worked at Career Builder, like, which was like those two were head to head, like, years later. So it's a space that I know super, super well. So, for that one in particular, like, what was it? I mean, had you ever, done programming before, but what was it? I mean, what was the process of like getting that business? Cause I know you invested, some of your own savings into it as well too.
Yeah, I went to a forum called Web Hosting Talk, which I don't even know if it exists anymore. And I went on there, found some developers, worked with them, and they popped up the site.
And so that's how it gets started. And then is that the role then when you start to work with, you had started kind of your first dabble into internet marketing? Was
I
that
did,
around
because
Advice
I
Monkey?
popped the site and I'm like, oh, everyone's going to come and I'm going to be rich. And then no one came. And then I was like, oh, I had to do some marketing and I paid some people, got burnt, got no results, ran out of money, was frustrated, had to learn it on my own, got decent at it. And the site started getting good traffic. But then I was still making no money. Like, literally, I was making no money because I didn't realize it's because you have traffic, you got to convert them. Job board is a two-sided sale, the employers and the quote-unquote potential candidates. And I was just fed up. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to go to college and get a degree and get a real job. So I started night classes when I was 16 at a community college called Cypress. One of my first classes was Speech 101, gave a speech on how Google works and how to get more traffic. And someone in there was a sales rep at a company called Alpac, who was like, hey, we're looking for someone like you. And keep in mind, back then, this kind of stuff was more rare, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. What year is this right now? Is this for context for everybody? Like, what year are we in?
Oh, what year? 2001.
Yeah.
Somewhere around 2001.
Yeah, so Google's just coming up. You're probably like using web crawler before that or something. Or some of the other ones, Netscape.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so you're still going. So did you finish? I mean, did you get your high school degree then to start to enroll, or could you do both?
No, I did both because I was 16, so I didn't finish high school yet either. But I was just doing both. And one of the guys in there introduced me to someone at his company. The guy was an engineer. Funny enough, he was the son of the father who owned the company. And he's like, yeah, we're looking to do what you do for our power supply manufacturer business. Paid me a few $100s an hour, technically less than $200 an hour, $100 and something an hour back then. He hired me for 10 hours. I thought I was rolling in the dough. And he's like, hey, do you want to just do it for us every month? And he started me off at a few thousand a month and scaled me up to $5,000 a month. And that was a lot of money for a kid who's 16, like $5,000 a month. Even today, $5,000 a month is good money. And that's how I really got my start. And then they had a consultant who was also part of that company, and the consultant gave me more of his clients. And then next thing you know, added up. And then the owner, his other son, owned an ad agency, and he's like, let me go sell like the Blue Cross and the Countrywide, which no longer exists. And he's just like an ING Direct and all these people. And he's like, well, yeah, we'll just give you a quote unquote cut. They would just charge more and give me a fraction of what they would get. I didn't care. I was making good money.
Yeah, and you're 16, 17 at this time.
And they ramped me up. And between the consultant and the other brother who owned that agency, got me enough business where I was doing around 20 a month.
Wow. And then, okay, because this is crazy, right? I think for most people at high school, it's like, yeah, like they get that job at Knott's Berry Farms and they're like, yeah, like this is good. Like this is just what I'm supposed to be doing, high school. And then I'll get like my real job, 5 or 6 years later. And then I think you started your own Advantage Consulting Services, I think with your sister, I guess your sister's now husband. Is that whenever it started to ramp, like you started to get up to that level
the 20
of
grand,
20,000 a month?
Was when we started that and had a real business.
Yeah, and you're like, all right, I need to do this. And so are you still going to classes at this point? You're still like getting ready to finish high school, still going to Cypress?
Yeah, and I went to college as well, so I did both. It took me forever to graduate, 5.5 years. Didn't want to go to college. My parents wanted me to, so I just did it.
Right. So then you're like, all right, I'm just going to go do this thing. We can talk a little bit about that. So, all right. So from what I understand, so then you it's Cal State Fullerton, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what made you pick Cal State Fullerton? What was the logic there?
Close, easy school to get into. I scored way better than most of the kids that ever went to that school. I'm not trying to talk trash. It was just the reality. So because it's a state-based school, my assumption was they couldn't fail like 50% of the students. And I started looking at some of their test scores and their numbers, and I was like, well, if I don't try and I don't read or read any of the books or do anything, I'm probably still going to perform better than 50% of the students. So that's
very calculated. That's like, what do you, I mean, I think it's just a really interesting mindset. I mean, as you think about what you're thinking about in high school and how you're thinking about college compared to, I don't know, 97% of people, where do you like, again, what was a lot of this driven, Neil, off of, again, like just seeing a different path, or like, again, as I'm sure you've looked back and thought about this, like what is it you feel like really kind of re-engineered you to think of things, in this way versus like your peers and everyone else around you?
Well, I was making money. All I cared for was money, and I was very motivated by it. So my thought process would change. And keep in mind, in high school, when I started making money, my grades also started going down too. I couldn't get into one of those great schools. I had no chance to get into a Stanford or a Harvard or a Yale or even the USCs or UCLAs, which are easier to get
Sure.
to. I had no chance to get into any of the top schools. There's just no way they would have accepted my grades. I went from getting straight A's to getting B's and C's, and I just wasn't quote unquote Ivy League material at that point. And my grades kept getting worse and worse as I started making more money, because I was like, screw this. I'm like, I'm just going to go make money. I'm like, I'm supposed to go to school, then college to try to make money. And keep in mind, 20 grand a month was more than both my parents combined.
Yeah.
Right? In income. So I was just like, so how is college going to help me?
How were your parents supportive? Were they, during this time? I mean, obviously they wanted you to go to college, right?
Of the money, yes. Of the no college, no.
Yeah. So that they were okay with that. But then in their mind, did they see this as like, oh, he's just like messing around, or, he's
No, they liked it, and they were all supportive of it.
All right. That's cool.
They didn't care for a job or anything like that. They're like, look, a college degree is just a backup.
Right. Just in case. And so at what point do you start Crazy Egg? What point, like what year is that?
Ooh, I don't know the exact year. It was before 2010 for sure.
But you're at Cal State, right? You're at Cal
I was
State
at
Fullerton.
Cal State Fullerton. And what I ended up learning throughout that process was we were doing marketing for companies, and bigger companies. And some of them spend like $5, $6, $10 million on paid advertising. And they didn't track their ROI. They didn't know how to get more of ROI. So we created Crazy Egg to solve that problem.
Yeah. So because right now you're on the agency side, and what was it? I mean, was it just like seeing the opportunity of a software play versus the consulting and the work that you all were doing?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
I also hated consulting, because consulting it's hard to get clients. You can lose clients anytime. It doesn't matter when you have contracts. It was a shitty business for me to run, and too many ups and downs and not as much consistency. Although funny enough, my current business that I spend all my time on is a consulting company called NP Digital. And it's grown quite massive. I think we're getting close to like 500 employees, and we're roughly 4 years old now.
Yeah, there's a long path, right? Of especially and I'm sure you learned a lot even probably from that experience, right? The early experience of the do's and don'ts and setting up processes and all of those things as well.
Yep.
So all right. So what are some of the, what else at school do you remember? So you're starting a business. I understand. From what I see, you're working 60 hours a week still at college. You're traveling. You're attending over 50 conferences a year. What else do you remember about college? Like, is there anything else that really stands out to you? Any, other things that you were interested in outside of just hustling?
No, and I wasn't at school enough to really get the quote unquote college experience. I did know that a lot of my teachers thought I was someone who wasn't going to do well in life just because I was barely there Didn't put in much effort. I remember one of the teachers kicked me out of her class. I never would have guessed that in college. It was an English class, and I don't know why she started doing math problems, but I was correcting her as she was doing her multiplication and addition and division. And I was like, and she just got pissed. But it is what it is.
Yeah, because there's no like remote learning at this point, right? In 2000.
Well, there were online classes, but the online classes still required you to go in person, every once in a while. I'm like, this isn't truly online, but okay.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, oh, yeah, it would have been helpful if they had kind of what they have now as well. But while you're at college, again, what I think is interesting, again, is that you're named by Wall Street Journal as a top web influencer. So how did that come about?
I was really big in social media marketing early on. Dig, Reddit, StumbleUpon, leveraging Facebook, MySpace. Back then, a lot of these sites were just coming around or popular. Like StumbleUpon got bought by eBay, right? Like no one would have guessed it was going to be a big company. Delicious was another one. I don't even know if Delicious still exists, but yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So you're at school and these things are happening. I mean, for you, like, is there a point, or at what point, right? Because you're still in school during this period. Then you start your first blog. That's also named, like a top social media blog. You launch Quick Sprout blog as well. Like, is there a point? At what point do you realize like you're different? Meaning, like, at what point do you realize I have a different skill set than a vast majority of people who have been in marketing or, been in various digital roles for a lot longer than I have?
I knew I was different when I was like 16.
What was it that made you feel that?
People around my age focused on dating and social aspects, and all I cared to do was make money. So that's what I knew I was just a little bit off, not necessarily socially, but I was just a little bit off on how I was thinking and my thought process.
Yeah. And then at what point do you realize that you're, in terms of just knowledge base then, right? Because again, you're still in your early 20s here. Or maybe, yeah, very early. Like, do you realize like, man, I know more than most of these people? Obviously there's your English teacher, right? Who that's a whole other thing. But is there a point here where you realize, again, like you're continuing to do these things, like you said, they're just different, like just different motivations, where you would look at your peers or, do any of these as like kind of accomplishments early in your career stand out as being like a never a rest on your laurels type of moment, but a, wow, like I think that there's like something different here and that I'm going to be much bigger, maybe even than I thought I would. Or maybe you always thought that, hey, I'm going to be building these big companies and selling them or
I didn't think of anything like that. That wasn't part of the process. More so just try to do the best I could and make money and live a better life. It never had like I wanted to be rich, but there was no specific number.
Yeah. And you had to see yourself accelerating past people, right? Obviously if, at that age you're making already, $20K, and now at this point, obviously with Crazy Egg, that turns out to be wildly successful. And then you start Kissmetrics.
Yeah. And Kissmetrics, I was actually going to bring that up. Raise venture capital. It was in essence Crazy Egg 2.0. It didn't work out. We didn't hit mobile hard enough. Back then mobile was starting to become a big boom and doing software for mobile. And then the second thing that happened is we got an FTC investigation and a class action lawsuit over data privacy. And that caused all the potential buyers to not want to acquire the company and investors to not give any more money.
What was that experience? I mean, because you started this as I think it's like basically 2008, 2011. So again, you built Crazy Egg, with your partner, and you spend you're investing quite a few years into Kissmetrics. What were some of your big takeaways through that experience? Because again, kind of for everyone thinking out there, this is 2008. I mean, this is right at the kind of economic meltdown time too, and you're starting this analytics organization that focus on paid and tracking various types of media performance. And so, what were those years like for you? Up to like, let's say the lawsuit, or just kind of realizing it wasn't going to work. What were some of your big takeaways there?
Yeah. my biggest takeaway is in business, no matter how hard you work, if you don't ride the trends that people are looking for, you don't have some luck on your side, a lot of times things don't work out. It doesn't matter how hard you try, how good you are executing your sales or whatever. Just, some of the things just aren't in your control, like luck, right? And I realized at that point, I remember Guy Kawasaki wrote a book called Art of the Start. And he really said, it's like it was a statement like to get funding and do well in your company is something related to like you have a better chance of getting struck by lightning, sitting in the bottom of a pool or something like that. And just generally speaking, it's if you can have luck, that's great. The big thing that I ended up learning throughout my whole career, and it took me almost, I would say, 18 plus years to learn. And that was, if you want to do really well, it's not about how talented you are. It's about how talented your team is. And you got to hire rock stars. That's the biggest lesson I probably learned in my career.
And do you feel like, at KISS, was that like the first, I guess, a glimpse of that? Or was it Crazy Egg?
No, neither. It was actually NP Digital. It's my fastest growing company by far. And I did start it later in the game and I had more going for me. But the big thing that really changed was I hired people who are rock stars and I paid an arm and a leg. And when I say they're rock stars, I hired people exactly from my competitors who are much bigger than me. Some of them are publicly traded and they're paying people an arm and a leg. And I took those same people who have not done it once. They've done it more than 2-3 times successfully before and hired them for the same exact role that I needed, right? That they did multiple times in their past successfully. That was the biggest lesson I learned probably as an entrepreneur. It was a hard one to learn. Logically, it makes sense, but you tell an entrepreneur, go pay that person, well into the 6 figures. Go pay that someone 7 figures. Give them opportunity to make that much money. It's like, just doesn't happen. Like people are like, yeah, it sounds like I can get it done cheaper or whatnot, but
yeah.
A lot really happens when you hire people who just know what they're doing.
Well, I think it's a mindset of like, these are the people that, who help to build us from step. I see this a lot with entrepreneurs and companies, is they want to continue to reward. And it's not necessarily like misplaced, the people that might've been the people that get you to 0 to 5 million, right? Or 5 to 15. But to your point, they've been there and done that a few times over, but they haven't been there and done it to 20 to 50 or 50 to 150 or whatever it is. And I think that's something I can relate to that too, as a mistake that I think I've made a couple of times in my career as well. And I think it's a really good lesson for anyone listening that there's so many sayings out there, right? About, you don't want to be the smartest person in the room. And like, there's, it's like, well, you want to be a smart person in the room. But I think what you're saying around hire the people that have been there and done it. And the other thing, Neil, maybe you'll be surprised, maybe you had this epiphany, but I've also been surprised is like, it's also a little bit of a limiting belief that you can't hire those people. Like, they might not take this much money or they might not be interested in whatever. And I think that was something that I dealt with as well too, which was like, no, like these people will kind of come work if we build an awesome thing.
Yep.
Yeah. And so as you're moving through this now, so you launched neilpatel.com and you can just start to see some of these like trends again, like you're getting into blogging, relatively early. At what point did you realize Neil Patel is like a person versus Crazy Egg or KISS Metrics? Again, you've been doing some blogs before. What point did you start to realize this idea of personal brand? Right? Like, was there a trend or something that you started to see? Because we're like mid 2000s now.
Yeah, because when I started doing Quick Sprout, I took on partners for it, and that business didn't work out, and I just gave it to my brother-in-law. Funny enough, it eventually ended up working out for him. But when I was working on that business at the time, I just wanted a blog that was mine, that was a place where I could just go and write. And I had the domain name neilpatel.com at that time. I owned that domain later than I did Quick Sprout. It took a while, but eventually I got a hold of it. And I just started blogging there. It wasn't to build a personal brand or anything. I just enjoyed blogging. That's all it was. And a personal brand was built, but there was no intention to build a personal brand.
Yeah. Well, what was the point then? I mean, I guess as you start to realize this, I mean, if you think about like, I guess what was it? Yeah, 2015 top 100 entrepreneur under the age of 30 by President Obama. Then I think it was 2016's maybe the first book, Hustle. So then you start to continue to do some of these, again, more recognition between like 2014,
but
2016.
Wasn't trying to, right?
Yeah.
New York Times, yes, because I heard you can get more speaking fees if you're a New York Times bestseller. Didn't work for me, but probably worked for others. And then the Obama and all those, I was just like, might as well just apply for some of these awards. But it didn't really do much for my career, being honest. I'm not saying Obama is a bad president or anything. I'm just saying the award didn't do much for my career.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it, and I'm honored. But it was more so, what really changed my career as an entrepreneur was just hiring people who know what they're doing. And I'm not saying my past people that I hired didn't know what they're doing. It's more so I started spending more money on talent, and I started looking for people who did exactly what I was looking to do multiple times for a competitor in the past. Because it reduces the chance of failure. That was a big shift.
And was that, I mean, did that happen early? So 2017, fast forward, is when you start the agency.
Yep.
And what, again, like you said, it wasn't like, necessarily the foresight back then. Was there like a moment or a hire or like an aha or a conversation where you're like, because I've had that where I'm like, I'm just not hiring people. I think for me, it's more of a breaking point. I just realized that it's just silly to continue to not do that. But do you remember a specific moment where you kind of that light switch turned on for you?
Yeah. So, well, I don't think there was a specific moment. It was more so I saw the results over time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then when you saw the results that you're looking for, eventually the moment hit or it materialized in my head and my thought process, but it just took a lot of time of just doing it and be like, okay, and rolling the dice.
And then you start to see a little bit of success. So there's probably like a intuition inclination that's like building in the background, right? It's like, I think there's something. And then like you start to like play with it. And early on, is there a key hire that you remember? Is there a key hire like in, let's call it like 2017 ish, around like that era?
Key hire that changed our business was a guy named Nick Rochon, who we hired to head up sales. That was a big key hire. And he was really expensive, and we were just like, yeah, well, if it doesn't work, we can always can him. I know that sounds bad. It's sales, though, right?
Right.
And then another key hire was a guy named Jeff Johnson, who was a co-CEO of Covario, which sold for around $40-50 million, and they were doing around 40 or so in revenue or something like that. And he had a lot of recognition in the industry, and he helped bring a lot more well-known people and he eventually bring in our CEO, Mike Gullickson, who ran a competitor that was doing, my guess is somewhere around $600-700 million a year in revenue. And that he helped bring many more good people as well.
How did you, I mean, this is interesting, right? Because you're talking about these key hires that you're making. This is like you've had, I wouldn't just say you've had a lot of companies or organizations at this point, before the agency. A lot of founders, right, or people who start it, right? It's called NP Digital. It's you. How did you start to realize, or, how did you start to think about what your role was in the company? You talked about hiring a CEO. You talked about some of these more strategic roles.
Well, I'm not an operations person. So I only focus on one thing, driving leads and traffic to our own website, which feeds the business, and then help with strategy for our customers because I enjoy it. I never was planning on running the business. Even from day one, I was never the CEO. Interesting.
And what do you think stops a lot of entrepreneurs from doing that? Is it self-awareness, or what do you think it is? Because I don't think that's a typical story, of call it entrepreneurship, is understanding that and not being the CEO.
Yeah, it's not typical. But I've done enough businesses in the past where I know where I was weak, and I've always been weak on operations. So I don't do I try not to be in roles that require operations or management. I'm a really amazing individual contributor. I'm a great contributor with a small team as well. I break once you start adding like 10, 15 people underneath me. I do really well with 4 or 5 people underneath me, and that's it.
That's really interesting. Again, I think a lot of people, I hope a lot of people listening to this kind of take this advice to heart, because what I see, and coming from scaling big sales and revenue engines, is so often I think people derive their, I don't want to call it self-worth, but their sense of accomplishment sometimes from the amount of people that they manage, right? Oh, I've managed a 100-person team or a 200-person team. Now, it doesn't matter if this other person did it better with 25 people. And did you ever have those moments, I guess, where you thought about the number of people, or like, what was it for you that made you like that? Because that's pretty self-aware, Neil. I mean, I'm sure you kind of get that. Like, again, it's different. Like you said, and you knew that when you were 16. Like, was there ever those moments where you felt that, where you're like, oh man, I should want to move into leadership, or I should want to do that? And either way, whether you felt it or not, how did you kind of re-engineer how you viewed success?
I always view success as being satisfied in life, being content. From a financial aspect, or from a business aspect, I more so viewed it as, is your revenue and your profitability growing? I never really cared for titles. I always looked at the CEO as a shit job, not because, it's a great position, but who wants all that responsibility? I like living my life and not having to deal with a ton of people underneath me. I was just always self-aware in what I enjoyed and didn't enjoy in life. And I never felt that you had to do certain things to like be successful or anything like that. I just believe that you do what works for you, whether that means you're going to be a millionaire or billionaire, it doesn't matter. You figure out what works for you. Because also money, I'm not filthy rich. I'm no Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, and there's other entrepreneurs that are way more richer than me. And I'm nowhere near any of those people's levels. And I'm satisfied with life. I enjoy hanging out with my kids, right? We rescheduled this interview because my kid was afraid of a stranger,
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that. Like, ideally, I don't want them to be okay with a stranger. That's more COVID issues, but it's more so of, I'm okay being a father. I'm okay not going into office. I'm okay not being as successful because I get to see my kids grow up. I figured out what makes me happy in life, and that's what I do.
Whenever people ask you these questions, or they ask you about getting to that place, what advice do you typically give people? So, as you're growing and scaling, I'm sure this is very common. I've heard you talk about kind of flavors of this in the past, but when you hear other people that might be stuck, that might not quite view it that way, are there ways that you've been able to successfully, share experiences, or, have those conversations with entrepreneurs or, companies that you've invested in, or founders that you've talked to, about engineering towards strengths, which I think is really what you've been able to do and kind of hold true, as opposed to, I think what happens is people might even have that, but then they make small sacrifices that lead them to go down paths. But what are some of the top, maybe, again, experiences you've shared, or pieces of, feedback or advice that you've given to people who might be struggling with what you're talking about?
So it's two things. One is, over time, through trial and error, you'll figure out what you're good at and what you like. And that's what you should just focus more on. You don't have to be the best at everything. Just be the best at what you enjoy and what you're really good at. Or you don't have to, because if you're great at everything, it's unrealistic. It just doesn't really happen. You can't really hone in on your craft. And what you were taught when you're younger on be a jack of all trades is off, right? It's just focus. People get paid if we're really good at one specific thing for many industries. And the second thing is, learn from your mistakes. When I was early in my career, I had revenue, but I didn't have tons of profit. And the reason being is I made so many mistakes. I didn't even have as much revenue as I could. And I kept making the same mistakes over and over and over again. And what's changed my life is I avoid making the same mistakes over and over again. You learn from it. You still make mistakes, but you're making new ones and you learn from it. And as long as you don't keep repeating the same ones, eventually it'll lead you down the path that you want to get to.
I love that. I love that because I think it's something that people can kind of look and reflect. And then, and I think a lot of people, there is always a path forward, meaning sometimes I think people look at their current situation and it's like, well, I've created this world. And I had a coach a few years ago and he's like, we went through the exercise of like, well, what if this happened and that happened and this happened, all those things that you think about and you're like, everything would still be like pretty good. Like if all these doomsday scenarios of, I think we like to think that we're as, mission critical. But again, like to your point about how you've surrounded yourself with like the right team, you're allowed to focus on what you're great at and they can do what they're great at. But if you're constantly making sacrifices, like you've said, then that becomes more difficult and that becomes stuck. I think sometimes people in their own business.
Yep.
So as we fast forward here, so again, agency has grown extremely, rapidly. What have been some of your big learnings over the last 4 years from going from, you and a group of people? So as a company scales at that velocity, what are maybe the top kind of 2 or 3 takeaways that you've had around, outside of maybe, if there are any additional points, maybe again, hire for the experience that stands out big time.
Yeah, that was number 1 for me.
Yeah.
Number 2 is you don't have to do things a conventional way. Just because you hire people who have experience and done really well, their ways may have worked for the last 20, 30 years, but it doesn't mean you can't change things up and use technology or change how things were done and make it better. And the third one is this one's a little one silly, but it's really important is time. Time really does help build great businesses. You just have to be patient, not give it 1 or 2 or 4 years, but you have to give it 10, 20 years.
And for you, I mean, you've scaled quickly. You scaled to hundreds of people at this point. How do you think about accelerating growth? When you thought, and again, like you said, maybe these aren't the things that that are your decisions or strengths, but as you all started to see that and things moved, it sounds like maybe faster than you had anticipated. How did you think about the right triggers for growth versus? Especially when you go raise venture capital, that's a whole other thing. It's like there's literally no other choice. But I still think a lot of people, it's like, I want to grow, I want more people, et cetera. Like whenever you were growing that quickly, how did you and the team stay grounded in growing, intelligently as well too?
Just hire right people who have done it before. They figure it all out. Seriously, right? Like I didn't think about how to do it or how I can keep growing. Just hire people who have done it. They'll do it themselves and they'll show you how to do it and they'll bring on the people who can do it.
How have you scaled yourself or have you really just never thought of it that way, right? If you think about these as your core skills, you've got a small team that reports to you. How have you up-leveled or scaled yourself? I mean, again, it sounds like going back to this theme about I just hired people who've done it. Are there other things that you've thought about even in your own life and career that you've been focused on growth or, areas that you're trying to grow? I haven't
really scaled myself. I wish I could say I did, but I'm not good at that. Never really did it. I have a great team around me who makes me better. Have learned from them quite a bit. I don't know everything either, even in marketing, right? So, but I haven't really scaled myself. That is always a breaking point, but nothing's perfect in business.
Yeah, well, you find the right operations people; they can do a good job of it for you, or the pieces of it that matter. And so, Neil, as we start to wrap up here, what is top of mind for you going forward? And maybe we can talk a little bit about marketing and where you see the industry headed. What are some of the trends that, as you look into 2022, that you're most excited about?
There's not a big marketing trend that I'm seeing other than omni-channel. You used to be able to build a business off of one channel. Like Facebook built it through email invite, Dropbox grew through social sharing, right? You tweet and you get more space. Companies like Yelp grew through SEO and so did Pinterest. It's like, but these days people raise venture capital mainly for sales and marketing, and all good channels eventually get crowded and get competitive. And the only way to do well is you got to leverage them all. That's a big trend that we're seeing going forward. It's not about SEO or paid advertising or anything. It's about building a good product, service, creating a solid brand, and leveraging all the channels to get your brand and messaging out there.
how do you then go back to, because this is what we hear too a lot in like the B2B side. How do you, I think a lot of marketers, but I still feel like so many people are looking for that one-to-one attribution, right? Or what's the exact right, second, third, fourth,
you can.
final
We look
touch.
at first touch attribution and last touch. So that gives us an idea of what's working and what's not.
So you're looking at first and last. And then how do you look at things like brand, as a part of that mix, brand or organic social?
You just had to spend on it. And it's a hard pill for people to swallow. But just think about it. If you wanted to buy basketball shoes, what brand would you pick?
Nike for me.
Okay. If you wanted to buy a car, what car would you buy?
Now, maybe I'd probably buy a new BMW.
Okay. Do you think you have to Google to figure out if you want to buy a BMW, or would you just go to BMW.com?
I'd probably go to BMW.com.
Power of brand. And it happens that way with many things. If you wanted to get a bottle of water, what bottle of water brand would you buy? Right? You pick one that you would know, like a Fiji or whatever it may be, or it could even be like a Kirkland Costco brand. Doesn't have to be a popular one.
Yeah.
We make a lot of purchases based on brand recognition and cost as well, but you just got to spend on branding.
Yeah. And what do you feel like the breakdown? So this is going to be my last question. And I know that this is going to be like, it depends. Because I feel like this is where, and again, my domain expertise is more on the purely B2B, and I feel like in B2B in particular, is there an underinvestment in brand? And it's almost like we're supposed to be boring and we're supposed to just do ebooks and blogs and white papers. For a B2B company, what do you like, how much of your marketing budget? And it could be like a range, but so people have some context.
I would say it depends on your size, but typically once you're generating millions and millions in revenue, you should be, and ideally millions in profit, you should just have a budget for a brand. And when I look at a marketing, eventually it'll be 10, 20% of your spend. And then eventually it may go to 30, 40% if you really get large. If you're a really massive company, you probably go to 50+%.
That's great, though. I mean, I think that's good for a lot of people out there to hear that even when you're not massive, spending 10 to 20%, because again, it's the snowball. It's the stuff that just starts working for you.
Yep.
And I feel like that's the kind of the so focused on short term, what did it generate this month, this quarter, that companies are continuing to lose sight of building things that are going to generate and pay off 6, 12, 24, 36 months down the road. So I think it's a great kind of quick litmus test. So Neil, I really appreciate you joining. There's so many really amazing takeaways in here about, kind of your journey, the way that you've thought about building companies and the success that you've had. I feel like that the theme here around surrounding yourself with the been there and done it people, I think is a message a lot of people need to hear who may be struggling or, might be struggling with why isn't my company continuing to grow and scale? So many great insights. Really, really appreciate you carving out some time here to talk us through it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks again, Neil, and we'll see everyone next week on the Jake Dunlap Show.
All right, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to another extremely fun and interesting episode. I thought it was fun and interesting, so I hope you did too, of the Jake Dunlap Show. Really great, just breaking down everything that makes people who they are, the success, the trials and errors, and I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite platform, and make sure, more than anything, to go over to jakedunlap.com. That's where you're going to stay up to date on all the latest guests, additional details, prep notes. We're going to be sharing everything on jakedunlap.com. So go ahead, go over there. You can subscribe there as well too, and we will see you next week on the Jake Dunlap Show.